Well, it is a very disheartening picture in both the case of the Gaza massacre and in the case of the flotilla bloodbath. Over 90% of the Israelis supported it. And it's really a kind of it's kind of breathtaking, the capacity of Israelis in any circumstance to turn themselves into victims. After the flotilla massacre or bloodbath, one of my former students said to me, he was thinking, how are they going to spin this and make them turn into victims here? And wouldn't you know it, if you read the Israeli coverage as I did, and you talk to Israelis as I did, actually I talked to a cab driver on the way to the airport today, and it got to such a point that when I paid my fare and I gave him the tip, he returned the tip. It was ugly. It was ugly. But if you read the Israelis, do you know what happened in the flotilla? This is what happened. There were these Israeli young fellows, very nice young men, clean cut. They were on the way to a Hebrew Halloween party. And they were dressed as commandos. And they had these weapons, it looked like Uzis, but they were actually just paintball guns. And then somehow, some way, they stumbled on this boat, and this boat was filled with all these crazy Muslims who wanted to kill them. And they just barely escaped a lynching. That's what the coverage is. You talk to every Israeli, everyone. It was a lynching. It was a lynch mob. They really believe it. I had a friend, any of you see the film American Radical? Okay, I've not seen it, but you know the woman in the film from Tel Aviv, my childhood friend.
Yeah.
You know, we've been friends since 16 years old, 40 years. And it ended over that flotilla. You know, just complete insanity. How many of you saw the footage on the YouTube of the Mavi Marmara by Iyara Lee? It was the footage was around an hour long. It was the only sustained footage of what happened. How many of you saw it? It happens Iyara Lee is a close friend of mine. And so I showed it, I said, Maxine, look at this footage. And tell me, do they look like, you know, they want a lynch mob? She watched the footage, it's an hour in length, and she said, all I saw was some Muslims praying for martyrdom. That's what you saw in that footage? Muslims praying for martyrdom? No, it's really, they've gone over the cliff. They're kind of like South Africa in the 60s, where they decide the whole world is against them, and now they're all hunkering down in their bunker, and they don't care what the world thinks anymore, because they've got it into their heads that whatever they do, the world will condemn them, so who cares what the world does? Who cares what the world thinks? We'll just do what we want to do. It's hopeless for now. What was the... Okay. Mahmoud Abbas as well. Let's put it this way about Mahmoud Abbas. When Mahmoud Abbas was a young student, he wrote a book, his doctoral dissertation. How many of you know he's a doctor? It's Dr. Mahmoud Abbas. He wrote his doctoral dissertation denying the Nazi Holocaust. And that's when he was at his intellectual peak. It's been downhill since then. The guy is a complete imbecile. I mean, can you imagine he's lobbying for the Nobel Peace Prize? He is. You know? They do. They love, don't be mistaken. Americans don't hate all Arabs. It's not true. They love stupid Arabs. That's why they love Mubarak. They love that Jordanian king who, he's still trying to learn how to say Keith Halik in Arabic. They love those Arabs. But I'll tell you something, you'll be very surprised. You know who's the only one they respect? They respect Nasrallah. Oh yes, they do. During the Lebanon War in 2006, the majority of Israelis, when they wanted information about what was happening, they were tuning into his speeches. That's true. They were looking to his speeches to tell them what's happening. They didn't trust their government, they trusted him. He doesn't lie. You may not like everything he says, but he doesn't lie, and he happens to be very smart. He is. You learn a lot reading his speeches. We have to go, or else they're going to have to spend hours paying for overtime for the room. So let me just say quickly this question. I'll answer briefly.
Good evening. I want to welcome you and to welcome those who sponsored this lecture. And I have 3 questions which need very short answers also. You think that Israel launched all its wars and crimes to restore its image, but Israel failed. Do you think that the Israeli government will keep trying to restore its image through launching more and more wars? This is the first question. The second question, where will you find the future of Israel as a state of occupation and oppression and injustice in the next couple decades? The third question is about, as a Jewish guy, I think, do you know that the government of Israel understand the language of peace? And if not, why they are pushing for the direct negotiations nowadays? Thank you.
I'll answer the last one. No, it's because it's the most important one. Because nothing has been a more effective enabler of Israel to proceed with the conquest of the West Bank than what's called the peace process. There is no peace process. A rational person judges a process not by the words, but by the results. So, the current phase of the peace process is said to have begun with the Oslo Accord in September 1993. What's the result? We know exactly that Selim, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories, just put out a new report called By Hook or by Crook on the settlement policy. There were 250,000 settlers in the occupied territories in September 1993. We've now had a peace process that's gone on for 17 years. After 17 years, the number of settlers has doubled. It's now 500,000. According to B'Tselem, 43% of the West Bank has now been confiscated for the settlements. So a rational person looking at the results and not the words says over the past 17 years there hasn't been a peace process. There has been a colonization process. There has been an annexation process. There has been an appropriation process. And the so-called peace process